Hi guys, good afternoon. How's it going? Everyone have a good day at class, stuff like that? Yeah. All right, so today we're going to be talking about AngularJS. So what is AngularJS? If you remember, I believe maybe like a month ago, we went over jQuery, and jQuery is a library. It gave you all these cool tools you could use. They could pretty much shortcut your way to getting everything done when you create your website. Just type in little $ and find elements, stuff like that. Now AngularJS is kind of like jQuery in the sense that they give you a whole bunch of tools that you can use, and then you can use those tools, but it's actually a framework. So it gives you a library of all these functions, but it also tells you what to do with them and how to use them. And so by using their methodology or their ideology, you're able to make your compact code and be able to create applications that are more efficient and can get things done a lot quicker than you normally would. And this is mainly for creating websites and single page like web applications. So it saves you a lot of hassle of having to go through and have like all these lines of code when you can really just pull it up and see exactly what's going on. So I'm going to take the GT web dev resume website, and I'm going to attach Angular to that and make it a nice clean Angular application. So if you guys are just follow along with me, I'll go through and explain how I'm going to do that and everything along the way. So I'm going to start by pulling down the source code of the current website, which is just regular HTML. So if you guys want to follow along, you can go to the GT web dev GitHub and clone the latest Spring 2015 repo. And yeah, scratch. So I'm going to start out by creating a module. So an Angular module is kind of like the starter thing you need to create like your first Angular app. It's the global like do-all like mother class, and what that allows you to do is keep your Angular code modularized. So you can have one module doing this, another module doing that, and then you can combine them, bring them in as dependencies of each other, and you can bring in other people's modules as well. So through that, you're able to kind of like import classes, you know, in Java. And so you can kind of think of it as like the main class. If you guys are familiar with Java, you need the main to start running everything, to start your basic Java application. But so I'm going to do that in the, so this is the client-side library. It's not backend like Node.js. So I'm going to start that in the public section. And then, let's see, Vector. This is it. So I'm just going to open this whole folder. Yeah. Alright. So here we go. I put it in the scripts folder to kind of keep it separated out. So this module is going to be like our mother load of where we're going to keep everything together. I'm going to name it George's Resume. If you remember the old site we had, it was George P. Purdel's resume. And then I'm going to pass in nothing because I don't want to pull in any other modules into this module. It's going to be very bare bones. And then that's all I'm going to do. That's pretty much the app right there. To call this into the HTML, Angular has a really nice way of strapping straight into the HTML. So if I pull up this, alright, so I don't have Angular yet. So if anyone's following along, I will download AngularJS with you because I'm prepared for everything.
It's better this way.
Yes, it is.
How did you get app.js? Did you just create a file?
Yes, I just created app.js. It's just, you can name it whatever you want. It's just a JS file.
use stuff from the folder we downloaded.
Which folder? The Spring 2015? I'm in that folder right now. If you go into public, the public directory, you can put that file pretty much anywhere you want. And as long as you call that in your
Can I put it in my AngularJS app folder?
AngularJS app folder. Yeah, see, look like right now where I'm putting it. So this is Spring 2015 public, and then I'm just gonna put it in here because why not?
I don't have scripts in mine.
Oh, you can create it, or you can just drop it. It's whatever you see fit. So I'm gonna include that into the file. Let's see.
Where did you get this from?
This is the index.html. So this is the main landing page of the website. You know, with a picture of George Purdell and his nice, cool resume that's going to land him a job. So script slash.
And apps.js is in the same folder?
I think, I put it in there, didn't I? I believe so.
Yeah, I guess.
So I'm including Angular.min.js on top of my app.js because it depends on the Angular file. So you want to make sure that when you're having stuff that depends on other, having JS files that depend on other scripts, you want to put them below because code reads top to bottom. So that's an important thing to remember. Let's see. So now here's the app.js. So I'm going to attach this right here. So what this does is this creates a root scope. So Angular.js relies very heavily on scopes. And what a scope is it's kind of like, so HTML, we have a DOM tree where you have the HTML tag and then everything has root nodes, has child nodes, and it trees out like a hierarchical structure. AngularJS developed their own kind of hierarchical structure, and it starts where you create the ng app. That's your root scope. So like in HTML, it'll be, so I put on the HTML tag because it kind of maps perfectly to the HTML tag and being the root, the topmost hierarchical scope. And they have a hierarchy down. So it's like a tree, just like the DOM. And so these scopes act as kind of the model views, or the kind of like the glue that brings together the JS code and the HTML. So the view and the model are glued together by scope. If you know what I'm talking about, the model is kind of, if you don't know what model is like an item. So you have like dogs, cats, and models kind of like the object, the thing that you would store in the database. That's one of the major perks of Angular.js is its ability to manipulate models with the view and have them both bound to the same thing. So when you update a model on the client side or the script side, it will push that view and it will update the view like in real time with the update to the model. That's called a two-way data binding. That's very important as well. So I forgot to name this. So I'm going to name it George's resume. So right there, that's going to be the root of the Angular application, and that's our root scope. And then next up, what we're going to want to do is attach onto this a controller. So if you don't know, a controller is, if you know, or is anyone familiar with MVC, Model View Controller? As some of you are. So the controller is kind of where you want to keep the logic for what you're doing with your data. or your models. And so through that, the controller can keep track of the view and the model and keep them separated so that you don't have your model and your view code all on the same client side and like all messy and stuff like that. You want the controller to do its own thing and then somebody else do its own thing to bring that in, keep it all nice and modularized and separated. That really helps in the future when you want to build out and improve on your application to keep stuff separated out like that. So I'm going to add on, let's see, so a controller. I'm going to call this controller, let's see, what do I want to call it? Main controller, I guess. Main controller, close enough. So now, then I'm going to pass in the dependencies, and this time I actually do want dependencies. So you see the format where you create something, you give it a name, and then brackets your dependencies. So my first dependency is going to be scope, which is what I kind of just explained to you guys. You'll kind of get the hang of it once you see it in use on how scope works. What else do I want? For now, I'll just do that. And then it's going to call a function, and I'm going to pass in the scope object so that I can use it.
You don't have to hit enter every time.
Don't have to.
Inside the array. Do you mean to do that?
Yes. So now when I have so this is the scope. This is what the HTML code or the client side sees. So scope dot, let's say, hello equals, say, hello. So it's kind of like just give you a brief idea of how this is going to work. Index. So now I'm going to attach this controller on whichever div I want. So I create this controller, and now I told you that when I create ng-app, it came with the root scope. So this controller comes with its own scope, and that's that scope that I brought in to attach to it. So ng controller, what these little new HTML attributes that you are not familiar with are coming from. These are called directives. Titus will go more into depth on what directives are, but they're kind of like custom attributes that Angular made up, and they do these nice little features, and there's a whole bunch of them that can shortcut your way through writing code, but these are the kind of the basic ones that you need to get started. So I'm going to call this just main. I don't know what I called that other one.
Main controller.
CTR, LR.
Yeah, I'm just going to change the other one because that's being
No,
difficult.
not like that. CTRL.
Yeah, I'm just going to be full English. Alright, so just kind of, this is the mustache syntax. This is how you access the data that's being passed in through the scope. So I'm just going to call hello. That should bring up my hello world. But first off, let's run this. I don't think C. Where am I?
Mine's working, so I think you did it right.
So running on 5,000. Alright, that did not work.
Where's hello? But
No, that's not what it should do.
Index that hangs, you know?
See. Yeah, I had app.js on my mind. So that should.
You also need to put a semicolon at the end of that, and then at the end of the first line.
I mean, I can do this,
Yeah.
but it works the same way.
But
looks a lot cleaner. Alright, so there we go. We got our little object on the front end. So let's just take a quick scan through of this code we have right now. Let's see, we got this. Oh, that's beautiful. It's wonderful. So now I'm gonna kind of like make it all nice and compact using Angular. You see a lot of, you don't really need to see the text. So let's go through and kind of, we're gonna call Clayton's API and Saleh's. Clayton and Saleh's API to pull in the data that they so gracefully stored on the back end for us. And I'm going to do that through creating a service. Now, a service is kind of like a chunk of code that you can call and reuse that will it'll allow you to kind of keep this chunk of code to do this certain thing. I'm going to call this, what am I going to call this? Just a database service, I would say. And this is going to, what is this going to do? This is going to grab in the database stored on the back end, all the data that's being brought to the front end. It's stored in like a JSON file. So I'm going to use a Angular service, HTTP, pull that in. I think that's the only one I'll need. Let's see. So this Angular service is HTTP. It basically allows us to call HTTP GET requests, REST, any REST calls to any URL that we choose. So I'm just going to make a quick little, say, function that is going to grab all the data from the back end. So it's going to return. Now what this does is it returns a promise. Now a promise is kind of like a IOU because we're dealing with asynchronous calls. So when you go call this request to this server somewhere, it could be in like China or something, it might take a while. So promises are kind of like IOUs, and so it hands back this IOU that says, here's this data that's going to be coming in pretty soon. Like, we don't have it now, but use this where you would put the data. And so it kind of like, that's how it deals with promises. So you'll see how this works in a little bit. But promises are really cool with asynchronous data because they allow you to call something once that data finally gets to where it needs to go. So this data is it's locally, like right on the same server, so it's not gonna take a long time to get, but that should grab just about everything, I believe. Okay, so now I'm gonna go into my controller and attach these to some variables to the scope. Let's see, database dot. I need to include, so I'm going to inject the service into my controller to use it, which is a pretty good idea of what to do. So it's going to pass in this database, and then I'm going to call this get data, and now what I'm going to get is a promise. So once that promise gets fulfilled and the IOU becomes a actual dollar bill, so now it's going to call this then function, which is, so then once that IOU gets fulfilled, I'm going to bring in I'm going to start setting this data to scope variables so that we can give them access to the front end and kind of manipulate the data through that. and it returns a response. So it's got to be like a function. Yeah, that makes more sense to me. Yeah, so it returns a response because it's HTTP GET. So you're expecting a response. So now let's try scope. Let's say like education section equals what does it equal? Response. I think it's indexed by a section. Yeah, I kind of like know what this data coming back looks like, so I know what it should do. I have no idea. All right, so that's very simple. This is just one section's worth of data.
Hey, real quick.
Yeah.
I think is it supposed to be database.getData, not data?
Oh, yes. There we go. Good call. All right, so now this is the, that's not the education section. All right, no idea what's going on there, but so this is the education section. So now the scope has this education object, which we can pass through to the front end. So I'll show you a quick glance on what the data looks like. So this is so this is what I'm indexing into. So what I have is these two subsections, and now I could go here and type in, get the first subsection, this, that, get the second subsection, grab that data. Or I can use this nice little directive that Angular gave us called ng-repeat. And this is a really sweet directive that allows you to go through and iterate through lists, and you can output the list one by one on the client side. So to do that, I'm going to go do here. I'm just going to, let's see, skills. Don't care about skills right now. Keep calling. So education. So I'm gonna call this data. I'm gonna call ng-repeat. So this allows me to reiterate through. So I'm gonna say I'm gonna call them each of them subsections in the education section, and that should cover that. And I'm gonna close it. Okay, you do that. You do you.
Do you have to delete all that stuff?
No, otherwise it would. I'm calling in that same data, so it would repeat twice. Because I'm kind of, as the data was previous there, I just don't want to have it there twice. So now I'm going to call, say, I think the first one was the title of this subsection. And so now I've got a subsection. I'm just going to call subsection.title. And then I believe the second one was just a P. And now we've got subsection, let's say dot start date through, say, subsection dot end date. And I'm going to close that P. And I believe I have the description as well. Everything looks about spelled right. Alright, so let's try that. Oh no. Data is not defined. I didn't save it. There we go. more errors. Or not. So let's see. Subsection in education. Let's see if we got this education object. Or did I even call it education? Scope.education. Alright, so let's see what we got back, if anything. So we got nothing back, apparently. Alright, so let's see where's going wrong there.
Is it capital education?
No,
That's not very.
in that.
Oh, that may have been it.
What was it? What'd you do?
Let's see. No, that wasn't it. Didn't save. Controller. Oh, I did spell it wrong. It might be, the scope of this might be too far down. That might be it. Nope. Actually, yes. No, so yeah, I put the ng controller. I thought the main nav was higher up in the hierarchy of divs than it really was. So I just attached it onto the body instead.
You can do that?
Yeah, you can attach it onto any div you want or tag. So you can just choose whichever one. Mine was not encapsulated, so that's why that issue came up. Alright, so this is a lot nicer for the most part. Alright, so yeah, I'll format the dates. This is embedded HTML, which I can fix in a little bit as well. So I'm going to format the dates with a filter. What a filter is going to do, it's going to drive the text through a filter. So it's going to filter out the text and format it. You can create your own custom filters by giving it the element that's being passed in and then have it output a certain thing. But
What was the error?
The error was the controller was not onto the correct div. I put it one below than where it should have been. So I attached it on the body, which is where everything is inside the body, just to make sure. And yeah, that caught it. So I believe this will work. Let's find out if my brain works right. No, it did not. Alright, that's a lot better, I would say. So this is going to filter out the date, format it nice. So you guys can already kind of see like how useful AngularJS is in getting. So I was able to get that down to just one iteration over all the education things. This skills section would be even more useful. So I'm going to do this one as well, and then I'll switch it over to Titus to cover directives. The full site is fully like Angular, has Angular strapped to it on every aspect of it, and you guys can check that out on the website later tonight. So this one is going to have the same kind of structure as the other data. Except for I think skills have, yeah, there's 2 sections of skills. Oh, that's very nice. I think it's like skill set. So if you look at the skills data, see that there's sections and then there's subsections where we go through and list all these different skills. So I'm just going to bring that down into 2 loops, which is pretty cool. Now you're doing 4 loops on your client side. Who would have thought of that? They would. So I think it's just the subsection.title.
Maybe a better naming is to use skill set instead of subsection, and skill in place of skill set, right?
No, this is outside of the this is in a separate column, so it's outside of the education ing repeat. It's its separate thing. I'll bring in the data after I do this.
Okay.
So I believe it's just the title. Then span. I think it's the, what is this data called? Skill set, I believe it's the name. So now I'm just going to bring that data in through, say, here. Alright, now let's see if that works. No. Alright, so I did not style this correctly, but you see me pulling in all this data in two loops, which is pretty impressive. Yeah, so I guess that's it for modules and services. You guys have any questions about services, modules? Sally?
So how did it save us time? How did it save us time?
So if you look at this, this is 2 lines, right? Or 2 loops. So how do you redo on a Mac? Or undo and redo.
Command Shift R.
Command Shift R. All right. See how far back we can take this. All right. So think about like if you have to go through and you have to list a huge list of data, and you have to do that in HTML. How would you do that? You would go through. You would have the div, and you'd have the list. And you have to go through and list every single one by one, and you'd have to know what data is coming back as well. Whereas this, I just loop through. I know what list I'm given, and I loop through. They're all going to have the same thing. So think about if you're creating an app where you have like thousands of items and you're trying to list them page by page. Like you ever see like those huge pull down lists of say like, I don't know, like places to live, I don't know, something like that, any piece of data. And then think of like how you do that. And all the data is relatively the same except for a few values, you know? So it's going to be all styled the same. It's going to have the same styling. And then look at this. So you have this much code. They went through and hand wrote all this. Whereas I could nail it down to like 5 lines. And when you go through and you do that through your whole app, it drastically reduces the size of the app. So this current one is 240. And then once I finish with it, it's 106. Once I go through and angularize the whole thing. And then even when you look at the HTML code, you can look at the code and you see exactly what's happening. Like you're not getting bogged down by all this irrelevant data. You know, kind of like you know that this is an education section, and then you're going through and iterating through all these subsections of say this. Let's see, where is it? All right, that's right here. So you know that you're iterating through all the education sections, and you're getting all the subsections, and then you can see like subsection.title. As long as you get your naming convention stuff right, when someone takes a look, like a quick peek at your HTML, they can clearly see what's going on and not get bogged down by this, all this stuff. Saleh, you had a question? Saleh?
Yeah. Oh yeah, sorry. Oh, I was asking him to do a lightning talk. I had a question. So, how is this better than rendering the views on the server side, like once Jerry did it?
Well,
Yeah.
so if you were to scale out and have thousands of users, would you want to be rendering them all server side and have that on your server to take care of that? Or you can
to reduce the computation of the server.
Yeah, you can like if you scale up really large. I mean, like on small, like what we're doing now, like you can do whatever you want, pretty much. It could be awful. It could be extremely complex. But when it comes down to like scaling, you really don't want to have all that extra power going onto your servers because you literally have to pay out of pocket.
Also, if you dynamically transform your content in the client, you can see the data binding happen immediately in the list of data that you have. If you did it on the server, you would not have that flexibility.
Oh, okay, right.
So it's all about having the client-side view rendering allows you to change the data dynamically and be able to see the results instantaneously without going to the server.
You cannot do that by using the server?
What's that?
You cannot do that by using the server?
You can with some isomorphic designs, but it's very intensive because you would have to do tons of GET requests.
Yeah, and think about what you'd have to do. You'd have to say your server's in China. You'd have to make a GET request every time and a POST request every time you want to change data. And that's really expensive, and there'd be a lot of latency because you'd be calling all this back and forth between a server. Whereas with AngularJS, like I just pulled in all the data I needed at the start. So on the page load, I can pull in all this data. I can run around, manipulate it, do whatever I want, and then say I want to save like a certain section. I would just save that section's worth of data and make that post call instead of having to make a GET every time I want to get new data from the server and post. It caused like a huge mess.
Yeah, what Trey said was a good example. So another thing you can look at it is like if you had all the search results that were rendered from the server side view, like you were saying, if you wanted to filter it and see the results decrease as you type, you would have to do a server side rendering every time. If you did it in AngularJS, you would be filtering from the JSON, and then the Angular would just exclude those results.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
that's not how Google does it, right?
That is actually somehow how Google does it for their live search. Yeah.
But you said if you wanna save something, then you'd have to reload the whole JSON file, right?
No. AngularJS does like a diff, and it keeps track of, it does like dirty checking. So it'll keep track of which files are dirty compared to the ones that you have on your JavaScript. And it'll go through and it'll run a digest cycle. I don't know if you want to go into more depth of that.
So it keeps
You
the-
can't?
I can.
Yeah, he can probably go into more depth, but it'll run through a digest cycle. It'll see which ones are dirty, and then it'll change those to the values that it has on the client side. And you won't need to call to the server to get all the data, you know, because that's just expensive. Usually what people do is they grab all of it, and then as they manipulate the data, they send what they post back, what they manipulate, and then that's it. You keep track of it keep track of that data on the client side, and then let the server deal with that data when you post it back. All right, so